Welcome, my name is Micah, physical therapist with 21st Century Rehab in Nevada.
I'm also a physical therapist of 21st Century. I'm Laura Ebert.
We are doing a follow-up to our previous running workshop. It seemed like there was a lot of interest in that and a lot of questions and answers that came from that. So this running workshop and discussion within this video will be more detail-oriented. We'll talk about some of the science and underlying principles of running, the running mechanics, and Laura will get to talk some of the application of those ideas and putting them into practice with goals and training programming. So I'll get started with some of the discussion, more details. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is that these principles and ideas within the discussion are rules, are generalities that apply to everyone, but to individuals they may need to be tweaked or modified just a little bit. One of the specific things that I mentioned last time was this idea that a cadence should be approximately 180 steps per minute while you're running. And that is a good general rule of thumb, but for different bodies and body types and leverages of a person's body, that might need to be modified plus or minus 15 steps per minute as an example. And the modifications or the application of these things can have some complexity to them because of the interrelationships of one aspect of running in another. So if I try to modify my cadence or my step rate, like I mentioned, it might change the amount of time that you're in the air, your flight time, or it might change how you hit the ground and your amount of contact time that you have with a single foot. And so as you try to tweak something, other things will change. Some of it will be symbiotic, it'll help each other out, but some other things might have to work against each other if you start to try to move a certain way that leads to compensations that are incorrect. So I'll talk in just a couple more details about that steps per minute idea. So within that, the tendency for most individuals is to have too slow of a cadence. They're plodding along and they're running, and the quickness of their steps is too slow. So that how many beats per minute, if each foot is a beat on the ground, is too slow. And so their cadence with running might be anywhere from 150, 160, and therefore they're not taking advantage of some of the elasticity within the musculotendinous unit. And I have an example for that I will like to show you. So I'm going to move the camera actually and see how this works. So if you have a racquetball, it has a certain bounce or elasticity to it, and a natural bounce and elasticity within the racquetball allows it to come back and bounce without external effort being added to it, and we're not making the ball fatigue at all. But if a runner is trying to modify how quickly they hit the ground or how long they spend on the ground, they'll have to add energy to the system by either holding down long, and they won't have as much bounce within their musculotendinous unit, or they might be trying to come off the ground too quick, and they have to add energy to come off of the ground rather than the natural bounce of their body. See if we can come back to the same location here. The ideas that I said there that you might be modifying artificially the natural tendencies of your body, but that idea that I mentioned of 180 steps per minute will help you get that natural bounce out of your musculotendinous unit that will allow you to, with less energy, rebound off the ground, be more efficient, run faster, or run the same speed with less energy output. Another topic to touch on would be initial contact onto the ground. And so there's, in running culture, over the years there's been some varied discussion about what is the most appropriate way to hit the ground, what is the most appropriate footwear, and again, some of this is individualized, but over time, last maybe 10 years or so, there's been a lot of interest in this idea of barefoot running. And while changing your footwear can have a large effect on the way that you run, what what will be more individualized is those aspects of what you're doing internally, right? How you're positioning your body, the step rate of the cadence, and the external factors like the footwear or the surface that you're running on will have an effect, but it can be smaller. And some studies show that if you change the footwear, you add a thicker heel or you thin the heel out, your body naturally compensates for those differences. And so let's say somebody's used to a good thick shoe, it might look like they're hitting the ground relatively hard, but what their foot and their tendons and their joints and their muscles are feeling within that is the compensation because of the shoes, so it becomes softer. So you take away that shoe, then initially they might hit the ground hard, but as they get used to that sensation, they will gradually ease up, and the forces that are put on the heel, for example, if it's a heel strike, would become more and more even to their previous running style. So you can consciously change those things. You can change them with shoes, but there's a large variety of the ways that you can approach some of these problems. So with initial contact, and I'll try to demonstrate here, as an individual approaches the ground. In our previous talk, we described how individuals may be reaching out too far with too large of a stride, and therefore creating a lot of force through the front of the shin to avoid that kind of slap down the foot. And within that, ideally, the initial contact will be closer to a vertical shin position. Therefore, you won't have as much of that toe up position. And there's a lot of variety as far as even elite runners, how they'll contact the ground, if it's more of a midfoot strike or including a little bit of flexion or through the toes. So each of those individualistic approaches can be appropriate, but obviously within the perspective of the ideals, that vertical shin is a good principle to go with, which will neutralize some of those extremes of ankle positioning. And there shouldn't be obviously excessive heel strike or excessive toe impact on the initial contact. Within the science of it, we can talk about ground reaction forces, and with the emphasis on a heel strike, usually there is a larger initial peak to the forces that are felt by the body. That can be adapted to, but some of that science indicates that those initial peaks and how high the rate of loading is within the heel strike predisposes to some injuries. So approaching more of that midfoot strike would help mitigate those initial increases in the ground reaction forces. And the modification that I mentioned earlier about approaching 180 beats per minute or steps per minute cadence would tend to bring that foot under the body a little bit more, would tend to mitigate those more intense heel strikes, and also take advantage of the multiple weight accepting portions of the body, the arch of the foot, whereas a heel strike would not take advantage of the arch of the foot on the initial strike. During the swing phase, little application of physics that I wanted to show was that when the foot comes off the ground behind you, some individuals may hold their knee too straight, right? And this will look different at different paces of running, but in order to make that pull through in the swing phase easier, bending the knee shortens that pendulum and makes it a more quick and efficient pull through. So I have a simple pendulum with some items from the clinic, and I'll try to hold it still and just demonstrate that the natural swing of this is about that fast, right? And if I shorten the pendulum, effectively bending the knee during swing phase, the quickness of the pendulum increases, right? How quickly it goes side to side. Compare that to that. Okay, and you can actually try that in a moment. So if you're at home, stand up with me, hold on to something to keep your balance, hopefully, but you can keep your knee straight and swing that leg forward and back, and just feel how much energy it takes and how quickly it moves versus pulling the knee through on the back side of it. So now you can see that the leg kicks through much quicker. And Laura will have drills to address some of those things as well. So we talked about initial contact, we talked about cadence or those steps per minute, and those things are interactive. As your cadence increases, hopefully towards that ideal area of 180 steps per minute, the ground contact could be mitigated or decreased. We could decrease the tendencies for heel strike. We could increase that tendency for the rebound off the ground if your foot hits in a more neutral position. Additionally, I want to talk about the idea of preparing for contact for the ground. So during the swing phase, as your leg decelerates from going forward, so relative to your body, during the swing phase, your leg is coming forward. It has to decelerate at this point, and as it approaches the ground, it should, relative to the ground, go to almost 0 miles per hour relative to the ground, right? So as your body moves forward, it should be a soft landing on the ground in terms of its momentum relative to the ground forward and backward. And if you're overstriding, you may still have that forward momentum of the foot and have that higher impact. Whereas if you start to pull that leg backwards relative to your body, when you make contact with the ground, your foot is very close to motionless relative to the ground in terms of a forward-backward direction. The motion downwards, though, is where you might hear the foot hit the ground, right? Hopefully, the sound is coming from the downward motion of the foot and not a forward motion of the foot. So that's where sometimes somebody says run softly or run quietly. They are trying to talk about this idea of relative to the ground, not moving forward, backward, not moving forward, so to speak. Now, it should hear some degree of noise because you are going down relative to the ground, and that momentum of the leg can help to get that bounce as well. And then once you are in contact with the ground, there should be a good degree of stiffness in the leg, although the knee and the hips are obviously moving. So while you're in stance phase, a couple aspects to talk about. And you can feel this one at home as well. So trunk positioning and leg positioning being interactive. So if you let yourself go through a squat and keep your trunk very vertical and hold that position, you'll quickly probably feel the stress build up in the front of your thighs and through your quadriceps and your knee. And one of the more common injuries with running is patellofemoral stress syndrome. So that's just an example, right? Within 5-10 seconds, I can feel the stresses in my knees. Well, think about the mileage building up and how if you're not putting your hips in a position to hold some of the weight in mid-stance, then all the stress is biased towards your knees. So now we've tried this idea. Now let yourself lean forward just ever so slightly, and then when you bend down, your hips are going backwards enough that they can accept some of the weight of your body. And now I don't really feel a localized fatigue in my knees. I can probably hold this for a long time, and I feel effort in my hips as well as my knees, okay? So, two aspects to the trunk positioning, right? There should be just an ever so subtle trunk lean. And one of the studies we looked at in the clinic was something about 8 degrees, right? So it's subtle, it's not much, but it can be significant enough that during stance phase, you have the ability to produce power from your hip, and you take some of the pressure, direct pressure off your knee and put it through the hip. The other aspect of trunk posture would be rigidity, and that's what some of those strength training principles allow you to learn. So heavy lunges, heavy squats, jumping tasks can train your body to keep a nice rigid torso so that you're not losing leg power through moving your torso up and down or other excessive motions. A fun fact with running itself is that it's not just an endurance activity, right? You have to have an underlying level of strength in order to perform well. And as far as how much force your body is feeling at that mid-contact or mid-stance phase. On a single leg, you're putting about 2.5 to 3 times body weight, depending on your pace, through that single leg. And so you have to have a good degree of strength. You have to have a good degree of trunk rigidity to allow your body to push the solid, rigid torso up. So imagine running in sand versus running on a track. Right? You know that running in sand is much more heavy, much more difficult, because the ground is giving underneath you. So that's my analogy to say, if you got a sandy torso, right, it's not going to let you propel yourself forward because you have an energy leak with too much movement in your torso. The other thing, just to mention quickly before I turn over to Laura, is the idea of arm swing. So the obvious portion of arm swing is just a counterbalance to the movement of your leg. So if you're moving your leg yourself, you have to, if you're trying to hold your arms rigid, you feel off balance and you're twisting through the opposite leg. Well, your arm allows the counterbalance to occur. And another interesting aspect of that is that as you get in a position to prepare for the next stride, there's a natural stretch reflex that occurs as one arm is moving on the opposite side of the leg. So if you put yourself in this position, sideways, and stretch the arm out backwards with the opposite leg backwards, you can feel tension build up across the chest through the torso. We call that the oblique sling. And the hip flexors connecting to the obliques, connecting to the pectorals, and that helps to rebound the same way as that racquetball, that your body internally rebounds the momentum of the arms to help propel and rebound the leg forward and backward. So some underlying principles, hopefully not too technical, hopefully understandable, and Laura's got some great ways to apply these.
Alrighty, so now going over a little bit more application and how you can apply some of these form ideas to your running, and strengthening exercises and plyometrics and kind of the reasoning behind these, as well as giving you guys some tools to use yourself for your training. And then I also am going to make available a document that we put together for you guys with a running program for how to train for a 5K for both beginners and more advanced runners, as well as just some examples of things you can do at home for plyometric, strength training, running drills, all of that you can incorporate yourself. So let's start by just talking about running drills. So what's the point of doing them? A lot of people don't necessarily incorporate these into their training. This does play into endurance runners. A lot of people think, well, if you're a sprinter, you need to have really good form, which is true, but endurance running is just as important to have good form, if not more important, because you're running longer distances, you're putting just as much force through those body parts. So practicing these drills, maintaining the techniques that Micah talked about, and I'll give you some examples, thinking mindfully about these positions of your body and proper form in a time when you're not training is very important, because it's that body and mind connection, so that you repetitively are doing it, getting it down, making sure that your form is correct, so that when you're in the middle of the race, the last thing you're thinking about is your form, because you're exhausted and you're fatigued, that it's more natural for your body to fall into a natural good form, proper alignment, rather than if you had never practiced this, had never thought about this, then how is your body going to know what to do when it's fatigued and you're not constantly thinking about it? So I'm going to go over a few of these techniques and things you can incorporate. So the first one is called an A skip. And with these exercises, I'm going to have you start by just walking through them. So an A skip position is that high knee position. You want your ankle dorsiflexed, so your toes up, and then thinking about incorporating your arms. So that knee drive, like Micah had talked about, is very important. So this is the position. So just walking through this, getting the hang of that, keeping that trunk forward a little bit as he had talked about, and then progressing toward more of a skip to get a little bit more warmed up. It's a good transition there. So that's kind of the first phase, so your legs up in the air. Now how do we bring it back down properly? So the second part of this drill is a B skip. So when you're here, like Micah had said, you don't want to strike out here. You want to pull your leg under you. So that's what a B skip looks like with your leg. So start in the A skip, extend your leg, and then bring it under you as you're striking the ground. And then same thing, arms go with you. And then you can transition into a little bit more of a skip. Really trying to strike under you as opposed to out in front of you. So those are good basics. Another one that I like to incorporate is a quick step. So thinking about good body alignment, little forward lean. As you're starting your jog, do just a quick cyclical movement. So this is kind of picking it up a little bit. And I want you to do this each leg individually. And obviously our space is not conducive to this today, but doing about 20 meters at a time for each of these drills is good. So for example, do about 20 meters, just focusing on your right leg. Is my positioning good? And then 20 meters, okay, now do my left leg. And I'm going a little bit slower than you'd want to do. You'd want to pick it up, do an actual jog, and then that quick foot for that quick turnover, making sure your foot's leaning where you want it to, and that you're getting a little bit more of a warm-up as well. So then once you've done each leg individually, I want you to combine it. So jog, quick with your right, quick with your left, back and forth, 20 meters of that. So that's the third one. Fourth one, I'm getting out of breath from this. Fourth one is you're going to start in just a good seating position. Think about your trunk position, arms relaxed. You don't want your shoulders getting tense. A lot of people tend to do that as they get tired and fatigued. So just nice and relaxed, shoulders dropped. And then you're going to lean until you feel like you could fall. And then you're going to take a quick step. So this really emphasizes the need to have that forward trunk lean during running to be more efficient, to be better on your body. So I would practice a few of these. Lean, take a quick step. And then after you've kind of got the hang of that, to progress into more of a warm-up, I would start with that position, leaning, quick step, and then go into a slow stride out. Do a few of those to not only be thinking about your form, but applying all the principles that we've talked to into a longer distance to prepare for actual running. So that's a good progression there. And with the form drills, I would say make sure you're warmed up before you do them, because although they are somewhat of a warm-up as well, you want to make sure your muscles are warmed up and ready to go before you do some of those quicker, more explosive movements. So start off with, like we had talked about in the previous video, just a brisk walk, and then some dynamic stretching, which we had talked about last time as well. And I do have a handout in the documents that we'll post with some examples of what that would look like for you. Okay, so moving on to plyometrics. So there's a lot of talk on, is strength training, plyometric training, is that important for endurance athletes or just for sprinters? There's quite a bit of research out there to prove how important it is for both sides of the running athlete, both distance and sprints. So what is a plyometric? Basically, it's just very quick bursts of activity. It's really working on your explosiveness to improve your speed and your power. A lot of people say, well, I don't really need speed or power in endurance running. But think about, okay, maybe you hit a hill and you have to run up the hill. That definitely takes some of those fast twitch fibers to kick in to get you up the hill, or to increase your speed a little bit at the end of the race as you have to kick. So it's definitely important, and not only that, but it's good injury prevention as well, to increase the muscle tone and the stiffness of those tendons. Also helps with your efficiency, like Micah had touched on as well. So some pros of plyometrics is it strengthens those tendons and muscles, it increases your fast twitch muscle fibers, and it just improves your overall efficiency as a runner. So a study that I looked at was called The Effect of Plyometric Training on Distance Running Performance. And this was a 6-week study that they looked at both pre and post training they had a control group who just did their normal endurance training, and then another group who did their normal training in addition to 6 weeks of plyometrics as well. And they looked at that lower leg musculotendinous stiffness as well as running economy, which running economy is basically just kind of efficiency, like how much effort you're having to put forth to run at a certain speed. And then they also looked at 3K time. So after the plyometric training, that group showed significant improvements in all of those categories. So they ran a faster time, they had an increase in that musculotendinous stiffness, and an overall increase in their running economy, so efficiency. So that was a great study in support of plyometric training that I wanted to share with you. So now I'm going to go over some examples of what plyometrics look like and things that you guys can do. And I mean, you can also do a Google search and YouTube videos. There's all kinds of things out there. I'll just give you some basics for today. So squat jumps are a good one. So getting into a good squat position and then exploding up and then leaning down into a squat and going back down into the next one. So that's a good one to start with. Another one you can do is, this is kind of a shorter box to start with, but starting on the ground, getting into that good position, and exploding up onto the box. Depending on how advanced you are, obviously get a taller box if that's not very challenging for you. Another one would be a backward lunge into a knee up. So you're exploding, this is more off of one leg, so a little bit more applicable to running. So again, lunge back and explode up, and making sure that you're really driving upward on this one. Another example would be a split lunge. So just a regular lunge, explode up, and then switch to the other side, switch back. Got a couple other ones I was gonna share. Oh, and then some bounding. So bounding is going a little bit more for distance. So you're going to bound off of one leg, land onto the next, and going to the next one. So it's kind of like striding out when you're running. So really going for power. So going for distance there. And then another one would be a high jump. So this one you're going more for height. So going up, landing on the same leg, going up, so on and so forth. So with all of these plyometric activities, it's recommended to do less repetitions of these because they are very explosive and powerful, so you want to make sure that you're recovered and ready to be as explosive as you can. So a recommendation would be about 3 to 5 sets of 4 to 8 reps is what I suggest, just to make sure you're being as powerful as you can. And pardon me, I'm getting a little out of breath.
Yeah, talking and doing activities is a bit harder than doing activities.
Didn't really practice the activity on top of the talking.
Yeah. And a couple aspects of those is that while she does them, she's utilizing the rigid torso that we talked about, and the power's coming from the legs, right? And if she loses position, she won't be able to successfully jump as high. So you can feel rep to rep how you're performing and notice any faults more clearly than maybe while you're running.
Right.
So
definitely. And then last section to go over is strength training. So rather than the short bursts of explosiveness, these are more longer, slower activities to just build general muscle strength. So another study I looked at was called Maximal Strength Training Improves Running Economy in Distance Runners. So this looked at more heavy resistance training. So like they did 4 sets of 4 in all of their lifting activities. So very heavy weight, very powerful movements. And they showed, they did this study for 3 times a week for 8 weeks, and same thing as the plyometric group. One group did just their regular running, the other group did the strength training in addition to that, and only the group that did the strength training showed great improvements in terms of running economy, and then also with their increased time to exhaustion. So looking at really maxing out their effort, they were able to run longer prior to that exhaustion. So another great study in support of strength training. And then one other thing this study looked at that I thought was interesting was that the body composition, so the weight of the individuals, did not change with the strength training, which I think is important to talk about because I know a lot of distance runners have the question, well, am I going to put weight on because I'm doing this weight training and then it's going to slow me down? So I think that kind of negates that based on this study, which is a good thing, to show that you can get stronger and be more powerful without putting on weight to slow you down. And then just some examples of some pretty simple strength training things. I'm going to demonstrate them just without weight today, but obviously if you're stronger, more advanced, and you have access to equipment, add weight as according. So talking about proper squat form. So you want to make sure that you're sitting back. You don't want your knees coming forward. You want to sit back like you're sitting in a chair. Keep your back flat, no hunching forward too much, no arching through your back. You want to be somewhere in the middle. And then coming back up. If a squat is too difficult for you, something that we like to do in the clinic, we do it often, and it's just a sit stand. So grab a chair at home and you can practice without hands. Preferably don't use a chair with wheels, but for today's purposes. So then just sitting and standing while really thinking about that good squat form as well. And then a lunge. So just taking that step forward, being mindful of your hip and knee alignment. A lot of times people's knees go in, hips can pop out. That can put a lot of stress in your knees. So going knee over toe, keeping that knee and hip in good alignment there. And you can do walking lunges, or you can just do them in place, however you want to do that. A few more. Let's go over another simple one you can do at home or at the gym. It's just step ups. So you can hold weight here, hold weight on your back, or just start with a step. So stepping up, tap, back down. You can alternate, go back and forth with your feet. Obviously, if this is easy, increase the height of the step. Another one is going sideways. So start at the top of the step on one foot, and this one sometimes is best to have something to hold on to. And what you're going to do is lower down, just tap the ground, and then come back up. Being mindful of where your hips are. Some people tend to do this, and that's working more my core in a bad way than it's working my hips and legs. So keeping that alignment good, going down, coming back up. Also with this one, making sure that you're not going forward with your knee, making sure that you're sitting back in a chair. You don't want your knee coming over your foot, keeping that good alignment as you're doing this one. Another one is a single leg RDL. So first of all, you have to be able to balance on one leg, so that's the first step. Next step is hinging forward at your hips, and you can be aiming for something, whether it's the height of a chair you're touching, or if you feel like you can go all the way down to the ground. This is a really good one for your glutes and your hamstrings. Just going down, keeping your back nice and flat. Don't really want you arching so much forward or back, just keeping that nice flat back. And then Micah will demonstrate the next one.
You can talk about it.
So he's going to walk sideways with the band around his knees. This is a really good strengthening exercise for your hip abductors. So making sure when you're doing this that your knees aren't collapsing in, that you're really using your glutes, and that your toes are pointed straight ahead. And then last one is a plank. I think someone else had a video on Facebook about how to do a proper plank, but most people know how to do a plank.
Yeah.
On your forearms. If you can do it, if that's too difficult for you, you can modify that by going on your knees, or you can even go in a hands and knees position and then just lifting up. That's one we do in the clinic a lot for people who can't do a plank properly.
Yeah.
So just maintaining a good flat back and then lifting up, keeping your core tight. So that's a good modification for people who can't do a proper plank. If you find yourself really arching through your back, or doing one of these, it's not really working your core as much as other muscles, so you want to really keep that flat back, keep your core activated, and if you can't, then just modify it. It's no big deal.
Yeah, we had some additional material for you guys, and we'll share it, probably attach it to either the comments or the description with the video. And like she said, we refer to the other professionals that posted the video on planks. They have good adjustments as far as difficulty levels and advancements for more difficult ones. Let's see, and as we referred to, there's lots of helpful resources online. If you want more details or different angles of demonstration for those skipping drills or other things, bounding drills, just Google it, YouTube it, and they're probably pretty good resources if you search for them. So.
And then just to briefly touch, so this is what the beginning of the document looks like. There's a few different pages. There's a couch to 5K, so that's more for the beginner runner. So if either you've never ran before and you want to run a 5K, or you're just getting started, I would suggest this. For those of you who are more advanced, you already are a runner, but you're kind of looking for just a more stringent program to stick to, there's a second one, 5K for the more competitive runner. So each of these programs, there is plyometrics and strength days built into that. And then at the end of the document, I put a list of all of the exercises I went over, so make sure you incorporate some type of strengths and plyometrics into that, whether you're a beginner or you're more competitive, because it's important for everyone in order to prevent injuries and just to become an overall more efficient and better runner. Just a couple other resources in here for you guys, so take a look at that. Like Mike said, if you have any questions or concerns, just shoot us an email, give us a call at the clinic, or you can put comments under the video and we'll make that interactive as we can so everyone can see the answers. So otherwise, stay safe and healthy, and thanks for listening. Have a good day.